Should I call you Charlie?
Yeah, that's fine.
Hey, we're here. This is William Wagner with Take Back America segment with Charlie Grapski, who's in Orlando, Florida at the moment for this interview, and I'm in California. This segment, we're going to ask Charlie about the city government. He found, what were they doing, Charlie?
What weren't they doing is more like the question. They were just stealing the public funds right from under the public's nose. They were stealing elections. They burned down their city hall to prevent me from getting records. They were refusing to give records. They were committing insurance fraud. They were, having officials, with positions that they didn't really have, and on the pension fund, pension fraud. But it all started when I went there on their city commission election day to get ballot access petitions signed for my own campaign for the state House of Representatives. And people told me about their concern that they were tampering with the absentee ballot process and some other things in the election, and it turned out to be true.
What people told you they had concerns about tampering with the absentee ballots?
Oh, citizens. When I went to one of the three polling locations. I was pretty well known by reputation. And so when people heard that I was there, they came to me and they said, look, there are people who had threats made to them for having signs for the opposition candidate to the sort of machine that runs the city. There have been businesses that have been threatened. In the past, they have tampered with ballots, and they believe they're tampering with the absentee ballots again.
When you say again, you mean in 2015?
No. This was in 2006.
2006. Okay, so
Yeah.
this has been an endemic, long-term problem. And we're
Right.
not talking about the city of Orlando. What city are we talking about?
This is the city of Alachua in Alachua County, which is about 11 miles north of Gainesville. So it's north central Florida. Gainesville being the home of the University of Florida.
Alachua.
About an hour south of Jacksonville, about an hour and a half south of Jacksonville.
Okay, got it. So you happened to live there and you were going to run for office and discovered your candidacy was not welcome.
My candidacy was not what?
Welcome?
Okay, no, not by certain people. Certain people definitely did not want me to run. I'd been known for exposing corruption in politics and law in the past.
So you're running for office in what, 2006?
In 2006, yeah.
And as a result of your running, what happens? Did you get on the ballot?
Well, no, I withdrew right before the end because, like I said, this was actually the first day of my campaign, and I got so occupied with just exposing what was going on there that I couldn't do justice to running a campaign. Even though I was getting free publicity and I probably would have won, I probably should have stayed on the ballot. But I stepped aside to focus on this. And then they began. What I did was I got a law professor who I've done other cases with to agree to take a case to challenge the elections. As I was continuing to investigate and finding out it was much worse than we even thought. And then a week after we filed the lawsuit, I went to get records, and I got arrested. I got arrested in the city hall after they denied me records. But while I was actually looking at the absentee ballot records, looking at the evidence that was going to prove the crime, so they arrested me for wiretapping, and that set off a chain of events. I got arrested several more times. Eventually, was put in a coma.
They put you in a coma by just beating you down with the...
I was beaten, and
by the local Lachemy police?
It started, in fact, the videos are out there on the internet. You can see the video of when I'm arrested. I was arrested at a police station when I went to the police station to file a complaint. And you can see them basically start tugging me and throwing me around. They threw me into the glass wall outside the door. And then when they brought me inside, they hit my head on the side of the door, knocked me unconscious for a brief few seconds. Then the next day in the jail, which you can also see on video, where I'm talking to the judge and I'm getting him to lower my bond, and they're trying to keep me in jail. You can hear after that, as while I'm on video, they're trying to drag me away from the judge, who's on video in downtown, and I'm in the courthouse. The judge does nothing about it, and I make them stop, and I continue on, and I prevail on a little bit of what I was working on, and then you see me walk out the door, and then you hear me screaming for my life, and literally, and you can hear, you listen closer, you can hear I can't breathe. They had me on the ground. They maced me from like 5 inches from my face, or like 6 scans across my eyes. I went into convulsions. I couldn't breathe. My throat was swollen up.
And this
Then
was what
Yeah.
month, what year?
That was in August of 2007.
So this is the year after the election you withdrew from.
Right. So what happened was, like I said, the first time they arrested me was for wiretapping. I was even banished from the city limits because they thought I was a terrorist, they would claim. So the judge said I can't even go into the city limits. And that took several months before I got them. They actually went to try me on the case, and I picked a jury, and I was representing myself. And finally, we got a judge because I demanded speedy trial, and the judge dismissed the case with my first motion to dismiss out of 3. But then they arrested me again and again and again for trespassing, for going to get public records. And this was the last time that they did it, well, the last in that sequence, and that was a year later.
And was the professor still trying to help you at this point?
Oh, yeah, he's been helping me throughout the entire time. His name's Professor Joe Little.
Is he still trying to help you?
Oh, yeah. I've been working with Professor Little since 1995 when we did a very famous political defamation case in exposing the good old boy system of Florida. It's called Florida Blue Key versus Grapski. Grapski versus Florida Blue Key, sorry.
Florida Blue Key.
Florida Blue Key. That's the good old boy systems that's run the state of Florida for a century.
Huh.
And I actually had to prove they existed as a secret society in court, which I did for the first time.
And that was in 1995.
That was 1995 was when the case was filed. The trials. We had 2 trials. One was 98. One was 99. I won both cases.
Did you win any damages? Any financial?
I won $250,000 and a $6 million judgment. I got. That I got $6 million, but.
But you never collected on it.
Not on the $6 million. I got most of the $250,000, but not the $6 million. That's still pending.
So that's still pending. And meanwhile, the city of Lachemy stole how many millions? I mean, I saw one of your videos. You had a copy of a check, and it showed, I think, $1 million check.
Yeah, 1.2 million. That was a check that actually the auditors found that was handwritten like
They didn't even take time to type it.
From themselves to themselves, just taking $1.2 million out, and nobody could explain where it went. But the city manager was defrauding the pension fund for multiple millions of dollars, and I proved that and got the pension taken away from him, but no prosecutions. He's now in the seat that I was running for in the legislature, by the way. When that city manager and the mayor finally left, and they looked at some of the things I was saying to look at, they discovered that the city, which is required to have an emergency fund, which had tens of millions of dollars in it, and it's not allowed to be touched. It's a felony to take any of that money out without very particular purposes. It was down to less than $80,000.
Wow.
And nobody can explain where the money's gone, or so we're talking multiple millions of dollars.
Wow, wow, wow. We're speaking people with Charlie Grapski, Grapski, who's a thorn in the side to the criminals in office in Lachemy County and probably in that whole area of Florida, which is why we're doing the interview with him while he's in Orlando. I would just like to tell you, Charlie, I've been down your road. I ran for county supervisor and looked like I was going to win in 2002. And then they suddenly arrested me on false charges, threw me in jail, published it in the local newspaper that I was an escaped convict, which wasn't true. I wasn't an escaped convict. But 3 days before the election, that's what they blasted out in the media. And the local newspaper was in on it, the radio, the TV. They were all in on it. And then they let me out of jail right before the election. Oh, you lost.
The damage has been done.
Yeah,
But
they
just like what they
achieved,
did to me,
right.
when they did it, I mean, this has been going on since 2006 with me, because just a few months ago, when I was heading to Ferguson in October and then back to Albuquerque, where I was exposing a lot of the stuff that was going on with the public records being hidden from the James Boyd murder by the police. The SWAT team came and got me and they couldn't get a charge on me, so they actually did what's called a Baker Act and said that I was a danger to my own life, and they had to hold me for 72 hours before, right before I was to get on the plane to go to Missouri. So
Wow.
it's been going on and on and on.
Which brings me to a question, Charlie. Is Florida a republic or a democracy, or is it a system of little oligarchies?
Oh, it's one big oligarchy with a lot of small little, pockets of corruption in individual towns. But the state, this has got to be one of the most corrupt states in the country.
And Jeb Bush, governor, didn't help things at all, did he?
No, he wasn't part of the old boy system, but he was part of the new sort of mixture of the two. You know?
Well, you're not alone, Charlie. Good people being arrested all over America for trying to defend Constitution and rights. And I can't get past this Republican guy whose grandfather helped Adolf Hitler come to power, George W. Bush. His grandfather, Prescott Bush, literally carried the cash in a leather satchel to Hitler, personally delivered it from the Harriman Bank in New York. And I have to wonder if the entire nation of America is anything close to a republic that public officials raise their hand and they swear they're going to take an oath to uphold the Constitution, and then they do exactly the opposite. They do everything they can. In my case, they never prosecuted me. I never even had a hearing. I was just arrested before the election and then released, and no charges were ever brought forth. They just made a false claim, said we have a warrant for your arrest. They never produced a warrant. And 5 other candidates in Santa Barbara ran into the same thing. They were arrested on false charges, and then they try to criminalize you and get you to cop a plea. So it looks to me like Florida, California, every other state, we're just a nation of oligarchies and
well, yeah,
power
oligarchy is the right
manipulators.
word. I don't know if you know this, but actually that's what I study is the question you just asked. I'm a legal and political theorist, and I used to teach political science and jurisprudence, and I studied the concept of democracy as what it is and what it's supposed to be, as well as the practice in America and how the two don't equate. And oligarchy means a government of some of the people for some of the people, and that's what we've got. We've got an oligarchy, and but I would emphasize that if we focus only on the national government, which is problematic and broken, we're never going to fix it because it's even more broken at the root. And the system, when it was designed, intended that national system could only maintain its republic or democratic status if that foundation of the local citizen-based politics existed. And when that's gone, you're never going to change up there. And if you can't change your local government, think about how hard it would be to change the national government. So we've got to think both top down and bottom up at the same time, and we've got to just get rid of the idea that because I live in one place and you live in another, we're not fighting the same battle, even if we're talking about something at our local issue, which a lot of these police abuse cases, I think, is starting to illustrate.
Yeah, did you hear the Kelly Thomas murder in Fullerton, California?
Yeah, I know about that one.
I was at the trial of the 2 police officers that were mostly held liable, though there was actually 5 or 6 cops involved in killing Kelly. Officer Cincinnati and Ramos basically walked because the prosecutor deliberately, in my opinion, in William Wagner's opinion, they deliberately, I'm talking about Tony Rackauckus, the elected prosecutor, ran this thing, and he did the worst job I have ever seen any prosecutor prosecute any case. It was clear to me, because I've watched 600 trials hearings. And it was clear to me, Tony Rackauckus wanted to be able to say, I prosecuted him, but the jury let him go. He did the worst job I have ever seen
Well, you
in,
got to
in my
understand,
life.
in a sense, we do have a class system in America. It's called a political class, a ruling group of people that are office holders, and they see themselves as part of the same class of people with the same self-interest.
Right.
And so, even though when you're going head-to-head in an election, you might be tearing the other one down, when you're in your office, you do everything you can to protect other office holders. You don't hold them accountable. You don't hold them liable, whether it's police officers, prosecutors, judges, governors, congressmen. There's no accountability, and when you have no accountability, and when the citizen voice is suppressed by force of the state using the policing in particular, you've got no chance of getting that accountability. But without that accountability, you can't have that Republican Democratic form of government. That's
Yeah,
a popular form of people.
that's what I've observed for the last 20 years, and I've been doing this television show in this city for 15 years weekly, and that's my conclusion. In fact, I unregistered to vote after Ron Paul was cheated out of the nomination. In fact, not even allowed to appear at the Florida convention. That, to me, that was it. That vote no longer matters. The elections are completely rigged. One of the interviews I did was done right in a hotel not very far from the hospital you're in, with a man who wrote the software to steal the election.
I know the man. I've met him many a time back when he was. He's now living in California and has a law degree now.
Yeah, and I interviewed him, and I kept wondering why no one arrested him, because he wrote the software for the Chain Corporation, which had a contract with NASA, which had nothing to do with elections, and yet
On behalf of the Speaker of the House back then, Foley in Florida, the Florida Speaker of the House was the one that had that whole thing arranged.
and nobody went to jail.
No.
Nobody went to jail, and here we've got him, and I've got him on my own film footage. In fact, he was in California running in the 4th Congressional District, which is Northern California. Then I had to go to Florida to interview him, and several interesting things came out of that interview. Number one, Italy had already tried using these things and threw all the machines out. They tried it for a few elections, said it was rigged. They were easily rigged. They could steal the elections, so incumbents always won, and the people knew the elections. But they let the rigged elections stand until they could throw the machines out. So Italy got rid of this crooked system, and then America adopted it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
That's insane. It's insane. So to me, the only vote that counts now is your vote on a jury, a petite jury, to find the defendant innocent or guilty. That vote still counts. Your vote on a grand jury, and this is my solution, Charlie, you probably haven't heard of it, but there's a guy right there in Florida who set up a de jure grand jury in Tallahassee, which is close to you. This guy's name is Anthony Williams, and he claims he got the judge to accept his grand jury sitting in the courtroom to watch the judge. And they told the judge, and the judge said, well, I'm following the Constitution, so I don't have any objection. And half the grand jury, about 12 of them, sat in the courtroom to take evidence against the prosecutor and the judge in case they violated a defendant's rights. And he said the judge straightened up really quick once he recognized they had an impaneled jury, de jure grand jury, that had filed their oaths of office with the county. So they were empowered, and they weren't created by any judge's appointment. And this goes to a case maybe you haven't heard of, maybe Professor Little has. It's called U.S. versus Williams. Have you heard that case?
I don't know the case, but I know the concept you're talking about. Well, basically, what it boils down to is going back to the early common law practices of grand juries, which has changed over time, particularly both by legislative changes as well as by judicial rulemaking by the judges themselves, some of which is questionable, other of which is questionable whether it was a good policy or not. But we don't normally have the kind of concept of the grand jury in most states. Every state's different, that we once had. or certainly that was the origin of the notion. But I perhaps we ought to. I mean,
Well,
I think that kind of a jury system is a very valuable uh, device in a democratic society.
case of U.S. versus Williams, the citation is the Supreme Court 504 U.S. 36. A 1992 case in a 6-3 decision where Judge Antoine Scalia wrote for the majority, and he points out that since the grand jury is not specifically assigned to the judicial branch, the legislative branch, or the executive branch, it belongs to we the people. And we the people can form those grand juries of 19, 21, 23 grand jurors, take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, file it with the federal courthouse if you're doing a federal grand jury, or you can file it with the county courthouse if you're doing a county grand jury, and they must respect it because it is the authority and it's mentioned in the Constitution but not assigned to any branch. So he reasons and had a 6-3 majority, and this was only 1992, and Judge Scalia is still on the Supreme Court. He reasons that it belongs to we the people, a fourth branch of government. And I think it makes a lot of sense. The problem is we haven't been doing it. We the people need to do this.
And I can assure you, most judges wouldn't care if it was the law or not. My own experience has shown, both in my studies and my own personal experience, is that the judges are out of control. They're unaccountable. They often don't know the law. Even if they do know the law, they don't care. They're like, well, you try to enforce it on me. The only other people that can judge me are other judges. And like I said, the political class looks after themselves. Well, the judicial class even more thoroughly holds on to that. Very hard to get a judge questioned. I've been denied habeas corpus, not denied the result that I wanted from habeas corpus, but denied having a habeas corpus petition accepted by a court 3 times and been held in jail. I've even been held in jail with no charges against me. And after a judge gave me bond, I had posted the bond and had the jail refuse to release me, saying that another county was holding me. That county didn't even know I was arrested. I had to get a judge in that county to call me up there and to be transported up there in order for him to release me. And there were no charges against me. I've had the prosecutor argue and the judge accept, who was his former prosecuting partner, by the way, but the idea that that the state has a right to speedy trial. Well, no, speedy trial is a due process right of a defendant. The prosecution has no right to a speedy trial. I've been brought up on contempt, and the judges don't know what contempt is. Contempt is not, I show contempt for the court. The law even says, if you read the case laws, it says if a person in a courtroom curses at the judge and calls him everything under the sun, the judge is supposed to be high enough in terms of his integrity that he can handle it. That's not contempt of court. Contempt of court is interference with the judicial process. And yet these judges will throw you in jail for contempt of court, or try to throw you in jail for contempt of court, just because they don't like you or don't like what you say.
Right.
In my case, I told the prosecutor that he had no business being a member of the bar. That's exactly what I said to him as I walked out the door. And for that, they tried to charge me with contempt.
Yeah, they didn't take that very well. In the Federalist Papers, written 230 some years ago, the writer, I'm not sure if it was Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, said if we ever have the same hands group controlling all 3 branches of the government, we will have absolute tyranny. And we have that same hands group in the state bar associations, in the American bar associations. And you've probably discovered that bar stands for British Accreditation Registry.
Well, no, actually it doesn't. The bar actually refers to a bar.
Okay, but
what
bar?
Installed in the old common law courts there was a bar that would
Okay.
separate the judges from everybody else, and that's where it comes. And so England, the people who prosecute are called barristers and all that. But the quote you just said, that's Madison writing in the Federalist Papers, restating the theory of tyranny of Montesquieu, which was widely held at the time, which is the foundation theory of the separation of powers, which was a new concept in the American Constitution. It hadn't ever been tried before. Now, one of my disciplines, political science, what most people don't know is at the turn of the century, by the 1950s, this had become doctrine. At the turn of the century, the discipline of political science said that the founders made a mistake and that the separation of powers is not a good thing. And then they reconceptualized the concept of the U.S. Constitution on a concept of the British Constitution written in a book called The English Constitution by a guy named Walter Bagehot. And Bagehot argues primarily for the consolidation of powers, the fusion of powers in a cabinet-based system.
Really?
And this goes on. Woodrow Wilson writes a very famous book as a political scientist before he becomes president called Congressional Government, which is all about the Bagehot model of government and fusing the powers. And then you get into the 1940s and 50s, and you get people like E.E. Schatzsnyder, who was one of the most prominent political scientists, and he was sitting on the reform of the party system. And he writes a book called Party Government, which is canon in political science. I mean, this is the paradigm that's dominant in the discipline today. He says that the separation of powers is a bad thing, and contrary to what Madison actually says in Federalist 10, that the mortal disease of all governments, but especially any popular form of government, republic, democracy, whatever you want to call it, the mortal disease that we have to create a constitution to prevent from happening is the disease of factionalism. And faction means party. And so what these people said was, what we need to do is strengthen the two-party system, only two. And that democracy doesn't happen. This is actually a quote from Schatzsnyder. Democracy isn't what happens within the party, but between the competition for majority power of one of two parties. And all of this they wanted to strengthen the presidency, make the president and the Congress have like a united majority power, simple majority, so that you can easily pass legislation when you win the majority. But that's the exact opposite of what the founders of this country, they wanted to make it tough to make a law. They wanted a law to be so needed that everybody would agree to it. And they wanted people to all their voices there so that you're not having one faction be able to negate the other faction. So the Constitution, if you read Federalist 10, the most important of them all, and then the quote you give comes from either 47... From 47 to 51, Madison writes about the separation of powers, and that's where the tyranny quote comes from. But Federalist 10, it's very short, and it encapsulates the core of the constitutional theory, which is you can't get rid of party and factional spirit. People will seek out others that they have a self-interest with without getting rid of liberty, and you don't want to get rid of liberty. That's worse than the disease itself. So what we have to do is create a set of institutions, which the Constitution was designed to be, on the understanding that local governments were democratic as well, that negated the effects of faction. And so rather than having an official two-party monopoly, we were supposed to have voices of everybody. And, John Adams actually wrote that representation ought to produce a mirror image of society on a smaller scale within the House of Representatives. That's what a representative intent was.
What are your credentials again? Your teaching credentials, Charlie Grapski?
I've got degrees in political science and law. I studied political science and political theory at the University of Florida, and I studied law, legal theory and legal history, and political theory and political history at University College London. I taught jurisprudence there at London, and at University of Florida I taught political theory and political science, American government, American foreign policy, things like that, problems of democracy.
What years did you teach in London?
'99 to 2001.
At that time when you were teaching in London, did you ever dream that you would be arrested in Florida just for trying to expose corruption? Did it ever
Well,
cross your mind that this could ever happen?
I can't say that I was naive in 2006 to how broken the system was, but what I've seen,
No, no, back in
I could never
2001.
have believed what I have actually experienced, and every week I experience more, even though I've now learned that that's even more absurd. It's
But back in 2001, back when you were in London teaching, did it ever occur to you in 2001 that someday I'm going to be thrown in jail, held without warrant, held without charges, that my writ of habeas corpus will be ignored? Did that ever occur to you in
no.
2001?
I again,
So
I
it
didn't
was
think it was
inconceivable.
impossible, but I didn't think it was likely, and I certainly didn't think I'd wound up in a coma.
Yeah, and they did. They put you in a coma, didn't they?
Yeah,
But that's not the reason you're in the speaking from the hospital today.
for the past month and a half, which came a week after I was taken to the hospital when we last talked. But that was for repercussions of what happened to me. But that wasn't something that kept me in the hospital. I'm here taking care of my father.
Right. So when they put you in a coma, how long were you in a coma?
I was in a coma for 2 days.
And did you ever identify the specific police officers that put you in that coma?
Oh yeah, we know exactly who did it.
Are they named in
Well,
your
well,
lawsuit?
I take that back. We know exactly who did the beatings and the torture a week before, but there's an issue of I was given a thing called baclofen, which is a muscle relaxant. The night before, I wound up in a coma, and there was no reason for giving me that. In fact, I was trying to refuse to take it,
Who
and
gave it to
it
you?
was forced down me, and
Who forced it down you?
I don't know.
Where were
I,
you when they forced it on you?
I was in a jail infirmary cell,
In what county?
Alachua County.
And was it given by a jail nurse? Or you don't remember?
I I have such little memory. I gained some memory back of it. I just remember a male and a female being in the cell with me, and that's it.
Wow.
And then I remember the hours before that, but from that point, I remember waking up at 5 in the morning the next morning and having absolutely no muscle tone, being asked to walk to the door to take my medications. I remember like projectile vomiting on my way. I remember them giving me Pepto Bismol and me projectile vomiting pink. I remember falling down back into the bed, barely making it there, and laying face first in a pool of vomit, which I now know was from 5 a.m. till midnight with no medical care. 5 a.m. My renal system shut down. And if it wasn't for one guard I do know who defied the order not to call 911 and called 911, had it been another 5 minutes before I got to the hospital, I wouldn't be here today. That we know. So we have all those documents.
And
But,
is that lawsuit lodged in federal court or in a state court?
well, I filed 2 federal lawsuits. I filed one against the city and then one against the sheriffs and the jail. I want the city. I was given $199,000 for the city's arrests of me and all that. And then with the jail case, I had a lawyer take $10,000 from me, and then all of a sudden drop the case, refused to give me my $10,000 back, and then I had to withdraw from the case. So I've never been able to pursue that case.
Wow. Fair enough. I mean, you're the one in Florida. You're the one facing the heat every day. So I don't want to, bring more heat on you. But that's not an unusual circumstance. People give a lawyer 5, 10, 25,000, and then they take the money and drop your case and say, I'm done. I quit. Thanks for the money. And I found something in the secundum that is written to protect lawyers that says as soon as you pay them, it's earned. They don't have to have billable hours. As soon as you write the check and they cash it, it's deemed earned, whether they did anything or not. And another thing I found in the secundum is when you hire a lawyer, you're basically admitting to their private kangaroo court that, hey, I'm an imbecile. I can't represent myself. I'm either a child, I'm an imbecile, or I'm under the age of 18 and I can't speak for myself. So I'm going to hire this legal beagle. He'll speak for me because I'm too stupid to speak.
Well, and I had to defend myself I literally was on the defensive, and I'm still under probation. They've got me on probation till like 2025. We're actually going to move with the court this month or next month to terminate that. But you'd think I was convicted of murder. Yeah, I was under house
Probation
arrest
for
for 3
probation
years.
for what? For going into a coma?
For going to a police station and trespassing by seeking to file a complaint, and then when they beat me up, I battered the law enforcement officers. I was charged with 8 counts. I was found not guilty on all but 2, and it's even worse because they realized they were losing, so they made up a whole new story in the middle of the trial. They said they had video, but we never got the video, which should have stopped all the testimony about that, but the judge allowed the testimony in. They destroyed the video, so of course we can't show it. My lawyer, Joe Little, was denied representing me in the middle of the trial, and I was required to use the state-appointed attorney who wasn't prepared for what came next. And so, like I said, I was found not guilty of trespassing, so I had a right to be there. I was found not guilty of disturbing the peace. I was found not guilty of resisting arrest with violence, and I was found not guilty of battery on the chief of police. But I was found guilty of battering. I was found not guilty of trespassing,
Right.
not guilty of disturbing the peace,
Right.
not guilty of resisting arrest with violence,
Right.
not guilty of battering the chief of police.
Right.
But I was found guilty of battering 2 officers after the video that was admitted to court, and they did give us, no longer shows after I went down a hallway, and as they brought me into a cell while I was semi-conscious. One of them said that the back of my head hit his chin. The other one said I hit him with the forehead of my chin, give opposite testimony. And the other guy said he had a bruised thumb. And so I spent 3 years on house arrest, and I'm on probation till 2025 unless we can get that changed in the next month or so.
I think you need to form your own de jure grand jury formed by we the people, Charlie, and make indictments and then hire the Bundy militia. Have you heard about the Bundy Ranch stand down?
Oh, yeah, I saw all about that.
Yeah, well, the best footage has never been released because Fox won't show it. And I have an email off to Sean Hannity asking him to give me that footage since they won't use their own footage. But, you know, he didn't even use a grand jury. And I've talked to Cliven, and I've spoken on Skype here with Amon. And I've spoken to his father, Cliven, directly, face to face. And they don't know anything about the grand jury system. But what he'll tell you is what I do know is the militia. When we called for the militia, 3,000 of them showed up from all across America, and they pointed guns right back at 200-some BLM thugs using their badges and their uniforms and their guns to do cattle rustling and to beat up their system. Well, that brings us to the end of the time we have for the studio, Charlie. I want to thank you. Let's get together and do this, and maybe I should talk to Attorney Little. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm glad we finally got this connection. It took a while. Thank you very much. I'm here with you. Charlie's in Florida. I'm William Wagner for Take Back America. Thanks for being with us, people. See you next week. Bye, Charlie.
Take care.
Okay, that's it. Charlie, thanks so much. We have to clear out of the studio. Thank you, Charlie.
All right, thanks.
And good health to your father.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.